Hello everybody, today we're gonna do something a little more classical for my channel. For those who don't know, my channel used to almost exclusively do reply videos. I took them down because they were lazy content and I didn't like them. But when I came across this, I knew I would have to do something about it. It's 1 minute long and I found it on r/Jordan Peterson with 2,500 upvotes. And it was just so bad that I have to make a reply video. It's about the not real Marxism argument, which you've probably never heard. That's because it's really the not real socialism argument, but that distinction doesn't seem important to him. What I will do is I will show you the entire thing and then I will get into the big argumentative problems, and after that I will take cheap shots like when he says plainly wrong stuff. And before we start, I would like to say that I don't necessarily think that the USSR wasn't an attempt at socialism. I think they did the best they could have done in their position, and if you want to call it socialism, I won't stop you. I will point out where many say it wasn't, but if you consider it socialism, that's alright. But even in that case, the points Peterson makes are still faulty, and if you too think that it was real socialism, or if you think it wasn't, you should still have a look at all the mistakes he makes, either to make better arguments why it was socialism, or to be able to refute people who repeat Peterson's faulty points. But anyway, here goes this video.
And then when the Marxists say, well, that wasn't real Marxism, what it really means, and I've thought about this for a long time, it's the most arrogant possible statement anyone could ever make. It means, if I would have been in Stalin's position, I would have ushered in the damn utopia instead of the genocidal massacres, because I understand the doctrine of Marxism and everything about me is good. It's like, well, think again, sunshine. You don't understand it. You don't understand it. And you're not that good. And if the power was in your hands, assuming you had the competence, which you don't, you wouldn't have done any better. And even if you had, there would have been someone else waiting right behind you to shoot you the first time you actually tried to do anything good. And that's what happened to all the old guard who ran the damn revolution. Stalin rounded them all up and shot them, along with their families and millions of other people. So even if you do happen to be that avatar of moral purity that you claim implicitly, the probability that you'd get to act out your goodness in relationship to those possessed by your ideology is zero.
Alright, so depending on how critical you are of him, you may have picked up on a problem or two already. The main one is that he's just making up his opposition. He says something and then claims that's what they say. He isn't too specific who they are, but I guess we get the Marxists at the beginning and that's it. There are many problems with structuring an argument like that. The main problem is that you usually misrepresent the opposition. Since you disagree with them, your opinion on their opinion will influence how you represent their opinion. That was a very complicated sentence. Let me rephrase it. Peterson misrepresents his opponents. And this is called straw manning because you're essentially making up a fake version of your opponent. A straw man. This isn't to say you can't repeat the arguments of your opposition, but you need to be more careful with it. Really, the only way to do it correctly is to either ask your opposition if your presentation of their view is correct, which you can only do in a debate, or if you quote them directly. That's why I showed you the entire video. I do not want to misrepresent his views, and I do not want to be accused of misrepresenting him. And I genuinely want to engage with his views as well as I can. To be fair, that's easier for me since I'm arguing against a person rather than a straw man. Oh sorry, I meant arguing against the Marxists. But hey, whatever, he condenses the opinions of some people for rhetoric effect. He isn't writing a scientific paper, he's just talking for a bit. And we can't ignore his arguments just because he made up his opposition. Let's have a look at how arguments work in the first place. The core of any argument is I say X, Y because of proof. Any argument needs those two parts, an assertion and something to found it on. If you just have an assertion that's not an argument, that's an opinion. And opinions can be ignored. If you say red is the best color, that's an opinion and I can ignore it or claim that blue is the best color. We will never get to resolve which color is the best one if we just say that. However, if you say red is the best color because it is used to make dangerous things and warning signs stick out, that's an argument. And that's a lot more persuasive. To refute this, I would have to argue against the why you put forth. That means I would have to explain why making dangerous things stick out isn't important to me. That's rather basic, don't you think? And what if I came forth, took your assertion that red is the best color because of its high visibility and said, my opponent thinks that red is the best color even though poisonous berries are red. Would I have honestly engaged with the opinions of my opponent? No, what I just did was not only straw manning, but also ignoring the reason my opponent believes what they believe. Now let's get back to Jordan Peterson's argument. His has 200 words and I will try to break it down to its basics. Essentially his argument is it was real Marxism. Or at least that's what his argument is supposed to be based on the title in the beginning. But then he completely changes what he's talking about. He goes, they say it was real Marxism, and I think they say that because they feel like they could have done better, which they would not have. Yeah, I had to shorten it, but that's his argument. He then goes on supporting it on why he thinks that they wouldn't have done any better, citing mass killings by Stalin. Now, looking at this, do you see what's wrong with this argument? It is the most blatant assertion of an opinion I've seen so far. Straight up says, he thinks that the Marxists mean something other than what they said. Here's the quote.
What it really means, and I've thought about this for a long time, it's the most arrogant possible statement anyone could ever make. It means, if I would have been in Stalin's position, I would have ushered in the damn utopia.
I have thought about what it means. That's the worst possible way to start off an argument. There is no logical rule being followed. He doesn't lay a foundation of why he thinks that. He just says, they say this and I think they actually mean that. This is as if he said, I have thought about this for a long time and red is the best color. This is not a solid argument. Keep in mind, this is at the very start and he keeps going based on his assumption of what it means. He completely ignores the premise he starts with and changes the thing he argues against. His argument switches from, it was real Marxism, to, you couldn't have done better. This is a complete logical mistake, and if it was written in a scientific paper, it would instantly get it rejected, which as a professor he should know. So, if you stopped watching right now, please keep in mind that I've already shown that Peterson's argument is wrong, and there is a lack of connection between the premise and his argument. To put it into a different context, this monologue is as if I said, you claim that red is the best color, yet red is the color of danger and poison. Poison is bad for you, and you should not defend poisons. Poisons kill people, and your defense of red shows your support for death. As you can see, I've not only failed to address the real reason the other person said that red is the best color, but I've also shifted conversation from what is the best color to you support poison and death. Not only have I strawmanned my opposition, I've also personally attacked them, which is a no-no in academics. This is equivalent to what Peterson just did there. He changed the conversation from it was real socialism to you wouldn't have done any better. This means that he either isn't able to prove that it was real socialism, or that he forgot what he was talking about within a sentence. Both of those mean that his argument is incomplete and logically not valid. But you know what? Even though he doesn't engage with the topic of discussion at all, that doesn't mean that all he says is wrong. He may have changed the thing he's arguing against, but he might be correct on a new thing he's arguing against. And maybe there is some discussion to be had on whether liking the color red means you support poison. His claim throughout the video is that people who say it wasn't real Marxism do so because they think that they would have done better than the socialist dictators of the past. He doesn't provide any basis for why he thinks that, which, as I mentioned, disqualifies his argument, but let's just look at the last half of his video anyways. Now the argument is, nobody could have done better than Stalin if they were in his position. And this is a completely different argument than the one he suggested in the first sentence. And this is a position I sort of agree with. There are many reasons I think that Stalin did the best he could in his position. He was afraid of a military coup, as Napoleon did not too long before, and he knew the fascists would attack his nation and that the USSR had to be industrialized as fast as possible in order to be able to survive the Second World War. And I genuinely don't think that I would or could have done anything differently if I was in his position. So I sort of agree with Peterson on this point. My position is that Stalin had to act the way he had to act because of the material conditions of Russia at the time. How does Peterson explain why Stalin was in such a tough spot? He doesn't. He just says that you wouldn't have done any better. And the foundation to this? The fact that Stalin allegedly killed the old guard who ran the revolution. But weren't we the ones in the position of Stalin just now? That seems to be the only explanation for why you structurally couldn't have done any better. No mention of how poor Russia was, how hard it was to govern such a huge state, how many people had to be kept in control to avert a counter-revolution. No mention of the way the economy had to be completely revamped in 5 years. Peterson's argument once again lacks a foundation. He says you couldn't have done better, and then leaves it at that. And that's a real shame because, again, I agree with his position. I think the USSR was in a very tough spot, but he doesn't even manage to convince me of something I already believe in. Furthermore, he doesn't even get into why I wouldn't have done any better. To be fair, that's probably because he doesn't actually talk to a person and just yes at the imaginary Marxists he made up. Kind of easy to win an argument like that. Reminds me of Ben Shapiro. So not only is the argument he uses completely disconnected from the topic of the video, but it itself isn't logically sound either. I thought the right wing were the facts and logic guys. I'm not seeing any logic here. And on top of that, there is another major problem with this argument. It's not an argument at all. It's a personal insult aimed at his opponents. Think again, sunshine. You don't understand it. You're not that good. Assuming you had the confidence, which you don't, you wouldn't have done any better. I don't think I need to tell you that this kind of argumentation would get a scientific paper rejected instantly. So within 1 minute, in which he supposedly dismantles an opposition argument, he fails to address the argument at all, makes up a straw man of the Marxists, fails to provide evidence to support the new argument he came up with, and replaces all of it with personal insults against imaginary people who think that they would have done better than Stalin. I think it's kind of obvious by now that there was no structure to what he said and that logically it didn't make any sense. And I think I've sufficiently shown his argument cannot be called an argument. In other words, within 201 words he managed to say absolutely nothing. And honestly, that's kind of impressive in itself. This is where I get into the cheap shots. Here is where he makes up a quote. Here is where he completely switches the topic. Here is where he uses his opinion without foundation. Here are the personal attacks. Here are the logical inconsistencies. And here are his grammatical mistakes. And there is every time he says something unfounded. Oh, and I haven't even mentioned how he completely mixes up socialism and Marxism yet. I decided to go with it and mix them up as well, but they're actually words with clear definitions and meanings, which he doesn't seem to be aware of or care about. So, in conclusion, kinda bad, isn't it? He made a 1-minute video and managed to put so much misinformation and logical mistakes in there that it took me over 10 minutes to show them all, and it's kind of impressive. So, what's the point of my video? Was it to own Jordan Peterson and flex with my knowledge of basic argumentation? No. If I wanted to do that, I would have stopped once he switched the topic, yelled at him for being a dum-dum who can't do logic, and titled the video, "Canadian Grandpa Gets Destroyed by Pre-op Transcript Using Fax Machine." Was my goal to convince people that actually Marxism is good? No, not really. I don't think that would have worked anyway. If someone believes what Peterson claims, they won't be bothered by facts either. But I think this video was not useless after all. I think it was useful for displaying exactly the type of faulty arguments you find on the internet all the time. Opinions disguised as facts, switching the topic, not founding assertions in anything. Those are very common, and now hopefully you will recognize those problems more, and you will not make the same mistake yourself. And that's about it. Thanks for watching. Thanks to my patrons for motivating me, and a special thanks to Aaron J. Patton for your generous donation.